Once we've removed the cams from a Magna head and a VFR head, we can begin swapping the springs. I would recommend working on one valve at a time because you're going to want to keep the valve, shim, and lifter cup in the same place they came from. My gasket kit came with new valve seals, so I'll be throwing the old ones away and replacing them with new ones. We'll be removing the Magna's single spring and lower spring seat and replacing it with the lower spring seats and springs from the VFR head. After assembling it into the Magna head, I've been putting the Magna spring and spring seat into the VFR head for storage. Once you've replaced all 8 spring sets, you'll have a Magna head ready to accept the VFR cam. Now I'll show you how some of it's done with real parts. Just wanted to point out that these dowel pins sometimes stay in the head when you remove it, and you'll want to pull those out. You may need pliers to wiggle them out. You'll need to put them back in when you reinstall the head. The first thing we'll do is remove the lifter cup and shim. And I basically just take a magnet, wrapped in a shop towel, touch it to the lifter and pull it off. The shims usually come off with the lifter. They'll be inside the cup on the bottom. I'll keep this shim with this lifter cup and put it back on the valve that it came from. Next we'll be taking out the top spring retainer clips, spring retainer, and springs. The shop manuals for the VFR and the Magna recommend using a spring compressor tool. It's basically a deep C-clamp with an attachment. In the past I've used a regular C-clamp and a socket to do this, and I tried it again. Socket. Don't do that. I ended up modifying an old deep well socket that I had. Years ago I used it to push out a bearing and I damaged one end while hitting it with a hammer. I used my angle grinder to cut a notch out of the other end. That allows me to reach in and pull the retaining clips out. The first thing you want to do, and this is an important step, is to put something under the valve you want to work on. I use a crumpled up workshop paper towel. This will keep the valve from dropping down while you're trying to pull the retainers out. Next, I magnetize the screwdriver. Setting the socket on there, I'll push on it wearing a glove that I've stuffed some rags in for extra padding. Push down and reach in with a magnet and pull that collar out. Set that one aside, and now I got to reach in and pull the other one out. And the other one is laying this way, so I'm going to lean a little bit that way so it gives them more clearance, and then pull it out. And there you go. Now you take your socket off, and you can lift this retainer out. And now we can pull out the springs. Next we'll remove the valve seal and valve. First I'll take the valve out. Once it's out, you can squeeze the top here with needle nose pliers and just kind of wiggle it off. Next we'll remove the lower 2 VFR spring retainers. A long skinny magnet is useful to remove the retainers. I'll be using a stack of magnets stuck to a socket adapter for my drill. And it's got a flat edge, you can reach down, and you got to kind of circle it out. There's that first retaining washer, and the second one, you can see what I'm doing or not, but I'm basically spinning it around and it comes out. After doing this several times, I found that I didn't have to remove the valve and valve seal to remove the lower spring retainers. First retaining washer, which I'm actually doing this one with the valve in. I guess you don't even have to take the valves out. I'm going to grab that second one. Now that we've got a spring set and the lower retainers from a VFR valve assembly, let's take apart a Magna valve assembly to swap the parts with. I want to reiterate that I disassembled and reassembled one valve set at a time to keep from mixing up parts. This ensures that the parts stay in the valve location that they've been worn into. The video of the assembly and disassembly of one entire valve location didn't always turn out well for each step, so I edited together the clearest video of the steps from different valve locations. That's why it jumps around. You may have already noticed it in the previous sequence. Just like before, we'll start with the lifter cap and shim. Again, a towel wrap magnet to pull the lifter cup off. The shim almost always stayed inside the cup when I pulled them off. Next we'll remove the retainer clips, retainer, and spring. This time I'll be using my modified socket on a C-clamp that I welded a bolt to remove the clips. I'd done a lot of these by hand at this point. And my hand is about wore out. I don't know if you can see the mark on there. I removed the flat part of the clamp, and that left the end rounded, which fit perfectly into the bottom of the valve. Hopefully you can see in there. They say you don't want to overdo tighten these. You don't want to put extra stress on the springs if you don't have to. And there that guy comes out. Again with my head in the way probably. Next I'll remove the valve seal, the spring seat, and the valve, and then I'll show you how I lap the valve. First, pop the valve out. Since this is the old seal, I'm not worried too much about ruining it. Again, using the socket attachment stuck to a stack of magnets, I'll pull the lower spring retainer out. Before I show you how I lap the valves, I want to talk about why I did it. Technically speaking, if you're using the old valves and you're putting them back in the same place, you don't really have to re-lap them. If you're going to install new valves, you definitely have to lap them to ensure a tight seal in the valve seat. This is a picture of a VFR and a Magna intake valve that I had removed. This is how the valves came out of the heads. You can see that the Magna valve has a lot of carbon buildup and the VFR does not. I don't know if this happens because the Magna has the wasted spark ignition system, which means that even on the exhaust stroke, the spark plug is firing, which may cause that. Or it may have happened because I had a more open exhaust system on the bike for a while, and perhaps the popping on D-cell causes this. Whatever the cause, this is how all my Magna intake valves came out of the head. That carbon was hard to remove. I tried brake cleaner and WD-40, but they didn't seem to be able to break it down. So I ended up chucking it in my drill and sanding it off with sandpaper. I was afraid while sanding I may have touched the red surface with the sandpaper. The red surface is the surface that is ground during the lapping process that makes the tight seal. So to be safe, I just re-lapped all the valves. This is old lapping compound I got from Napa. I got this years ago to work on the little Honda CT bikes that I have. Dip it and circle it in the lapping compound. Install the valve. I've got a small piece of tubing I took from an old siphon and I chucked it in the drill. It's got a tight fit on the valve and I'll push it on there pretty far. And I'm pulling back a little while I'm running the drill. And I found it never really takes any more than that. Push the valve back out. I'm going to wipe all the lapping compound off of it. And that's it. Just make sure you've got all the lapping compound off of it and you're ready to install. After lapping the valve, we're ready to reassemble the Magna head with the VFR springs and spring seats. Now I'll install the VFR spring seats, starting with the large one. So I put it in there, and I circle a little bit and I can pull it out. Do the same thing with this one. Sorry about my hand being in the way. I'm actually installing the small spring retainer at this point. Exhaust seal. I'm dropping the seal in oil. I have a nail. I'm going to use the head to push it down in. And I can't show this because I can't lift up the head and do all this, but basically I get it on there. I'm barely squeezing it with these needle nose, and you just push it down. They go on real easy. Put my valve back in. First, dip that in oil and just run that on there. Okay, now I put my VFR springs in. Again, both of them. The tight coils go down. The shop manual indicates that the springs are installed with the tighter wrapped coils down. Now I preload the clips into the top spring retainer. I'll set it in here. Remember to put something under the valve that you're going to be pushing on, like the wadded up paper towels I use. Putting a drop of oil on the preloaded spring retainer makes it easier for the clips to fall into place. I got a rag stuffed in this glove because it is a lot of force. I'll push with both hands slowly, and I just kind of work them back and forth. And you get a feel for it after you've done a few of them, where you need to push and how you need to tilt it. And there you go, they're in. That's the shim. Add the lifter cup. I'm going to mark this one as done. That's all the steps needed to complete one valve assembly with VFR springs. To keep from having loose parts around, I ended up putting the Magna parts into the VFR head and packing it away. Well, that's it. Just repeat the process for all 8 valves and you'll be ready to put the head back on the motor.